All right, we have Melanie Finn back with us. Thank you for joining us for the third time.
Hey Jen, thank you for having me. It's so good to be back with you.
I was just getting to hear that you're in the midst of writing another book, which means maybe by next year we can talk about that book, or no?
Well, I mean, in the midst, I've been in the process of writing this book for 3 years, and
Wow.
normally I like to think 2 years, but it's been such a crazy time. I've found it really difficult to find the time to
Yeah.
do this. And the problem with the book is that at a certain point you just need you need a consistent chunk of time so that you can just into it. And when you don't have that, every time you come back to it, you kind of have to restart where you were and refine the characters and reinvent everything again. So the good thing is that the last like 6 weeks, I actually did get a really nice grant from the Vermont Arts Council. So that has allowed me to take some time to just kind of dedicate it to really finishing this book.
Wow,
So
that's
hopefully,
amazing.
yeah, hopefully by the end of I don't know, middle of December, I'll have a draft that is like a shareable form, and then things move on from that. So yeah.
That's
So
amazing.
thank
Well,
you for
congratulations. It's a huge feat. We've talked about how painful writing is. So it's always impressive to me that anyone finishes anything. So well, we're here today to talk about The Gloaming, which is going way back because I guess I've done your books. Did I do them exactly backwards or did I do them? I
you
did
did
them
them
exactly
exactly.
backwards.
You did them exactly backwards. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the beginning. How would you, and I know you have some distance from it now, but what would your brief synopsis of this book be to someone who's considering reading it?
Well, The Gloaming uh is a story of kind of lost character called Pilgrim Jones, who starts out in a very privileged position, married to a very powerful and successful human rights lawyer living in Switzerland. He dumps her rather unceremoniously in a remote Swiss village, and she is involved in a terrible accident. And in her attempt to, I wouldn't say recover, but deal with that accident, she runs away to Tanzania. And she sort of proceeds to keep on running to this very remote part of Tanzania, and encounters a number of people, including perhaps a ghost, who set her on a journey. I wouldn't say to healing, but to resolution for what she was involved with. So yeah, it's sort of. I think it's a strange story. I know that I wrote the first part of the book, which was her story, and I handed it to my agent, who said it's great, but it's a novella and you'll never get it published.
Hmm.
You need to finish the book. And so after I finished that first part, which was, the story of Pilgrim, um, I suddenly became involved with writing about Inspector Strebel, who is the Swiss police detective who is investigating this accident that she's caused or been involved with. And I found it really strange to realize that like I had this emotional avatar who was a Swiss policeman. So,
It's so interesting you say that because I wondered, I was like, there seems to be a really interesting parallel of the way that Pilgrim is, yes, sort of a victim of her husband unceremoniously dumping her, as you put it, but she also sort of questions whether or not she kind of somehow subconsciously wanted it or kind of created it without realizing this separation. And it feels like Strebel is also not feeling like he's fully himself in his relationship, right? So it feels like there is this interesting parallel of like maybe there's something about her that he admires that's deeper than just his physical attraction to her, but it's actually like he's desiring the same freedom that she has in not being in that relationship anymore.
yeah, I think that if I look back at when I was writing this, right, I had just had my own daughters, my own twins. And so my sense of dislocation from my own self was quite profound because all of a sudden I had been jerked from being me
Yeah.
into like this other world of being a mother. And there's a profound sense of remove. Like you see yourself, but you don't really inhabit yourself. I mean, part of it is you're just so exhausted, but
Yeah.
also it's completely unfamiliar, all the feelings that you encounter. And so I think that the distance the characters have between who they are and their sense of themselves is probably a reflection of where I was at the time of writing it. But there were sort of two other really important things that were going on at the time. And the first was that, I brought my children into this world and I was struggling with the idea of how would I ever explain it to them? It's such an awful place full of
Oh,
so much horror and pain. Like, how can I, how can I, how can I justify that? And
yeah.
so some of the themes I was exploring were really um, those senses, that sense of resolution and of trying to find that in even the worst situations there might be something positive.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing that really fascinated me, I had read a newspaper article about this plane crash that happened in Switzerland. I think it was even at Zurich Airport back in the 80s. It was a Russian airliner flying into Switzerland with a plane load of kids and their
God.
parents who were on a field trip. And there was some error in traffic control, and this plane collided with uh, um, like a FedEx or a DHL plane,
Oh,
and all these children were kids. I think it was like 180
oh my God.
killed, and most of them were children. And there was an investigation about the air traffic controller who was this some Finnish guy, and he was cleared. He was cleared of error. But what happened was that one of the fathers of one of the Russian children, whose wife had also died in the plane crash, tracked down this Finnish air controller in Switzerland where he lived and like broke into his house and stabbed him to death in his garden.
Oh my God.
And I read this story. I mean, with the, like as a writer, you're in this awful position of where you kind of grab onto these absolutely horrible events and go, wow, this is really interesting. And you're sort of like macabre. Plus, I'm a Scorpio. I think it probably has to do with my attraction. But you also are so attracted to the humanity inherent in that. And I remember thinking at the time so much about that Finnish air traffic controller who was just a man. He wasn't a horrible genocidaire. He wasn't like locking his daughter in a basement and impregnating her 23 times. He was just going to work, and through a series of events, this terrible thing happened. And how do you, as a normal person, deal with the consequences of simply having been at your desk causing
Yeah.
this incident? And I kind of thought about the trajectory of this man seeking revenge for his wife and child, and this other man seeking some sort of release for what must have been an extraordinary burden.
Yeah.
And that how they were coming closer and closer in time until the moment they met. And I wondered if at that point of meeting, the air traffic controller may have even felt like a sense of relief, like,
Oh
uh,
yeah. I mean,
allow.
I wouldn't have said that before reading The Gloaming, but I feel like after going through living with Pilgrim's internal life and just the level of guilt and weight that came with this accident, I mean, it felt like how would she ever escape that? And I wonder if it would have been, it's interesting to think about this, the true story that was inspiring you because the Russian gentleman who came and killed the air traffic controller, it's like in a weird way, it would have been more painful to let him live with the guilt of what happened than to just put him out of his misery in some way. Do you know what I mean? Not to say that killing someone is encouraged ever, but do you know what I'm saying? Like on some like
Oh, yeah.
metaphorical level.
I think that I started, I mean, as I read the story, I started like suddenly, as you kind of attune in, I started hearing all these other stories of people who had caused these terrible events. A man had started a forest fire that burned down all these people's homes. Another bus driver had driven across a flooded river that ended up, 43 people being drowned. Like, and there was even a New Yorker article that came out after the book was published about people who do these things, but they're not guilty of any crime, and so there's no mechanism to provide them with either an act of reparation or an act of penitence. So they just kind of, as happens with Pilgrim, she's, like, there's no guilt for her. There's no way she can apologize or account for what happened. And so you're left with this, the weight of this. And of course, you don't want to put people in prison who have simply been in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But the the guilt that people feel, and it turned out that a lot of these people who had done these things, like the bus driver, died of cancer like 3 months later.
Oh
The
God.
guy started the forest fire. He like, he killed himself. I mean, there were just the you felt that the weight of these tragedies, when given no way to be redemptive, was very problematic. So
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, and the book had such a strong reaction too. It was I felt like people really had a strong connection to that story. And that must be that even if it isn't as extreme as being in a car accident that killed 3 children, like what happened to Pilgrim, like I think a lot of people are living with smaller versions of that, of like, if only I hadn't, this wouldn't have, it's interesting. I'm reading a memoir right now too that like talks a lot about like the woman is dealing with her mother having mental illness, and so much of her internal life that she's documenting in the memoir is, well, if I had done this differently, maybe she wouldn't be mentally ill. If I had done this differently, maybe she wouldn't, have, and it's like the way that we beat ourselves up of thinking that we could somehow impact the outcome of things is really very universally relatable.
I'm really curious as to like where this idea comes from that, we bear enormous personal weight for outcomes. Because I mean, of course, as Pilgrim, even you can go all the way back. I mean, like, if the trilobite hadn't blinked 3.5 billion years ago,
Right. Yeah.
well, so, and I don't know if it's specific to kind of our Western culture, if it's some sort of like,
I feel like maybe it's kind of built into religion, at least religion in the last, 500 years, of just like this idea that we have there's so much consequence to our action. Do you know what I mean? That it's like that we are the center of those actions. And if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. Like there's such like rule sets that are like kind of indoctrinated into our cultural thinking because of the sort of main religions that are out there right now. I don't know. I mean, I just wonder.
I think if we were like really good historians, or if I had a good memory, because I was just listening to this whole thing about Martin Luther,
Mm,
how he, really like his impact on the Catholic Church and religion in Europe. And there was definitely like he really did bring this idea of a personal approach to God.
yeah.
And so probably like some, cultural historian would be like, well, you can look back and this really started with
It's
the
Luther's
Reformation
fault.
and Martin Luther and the Catholic Church. And I mean, I listened to this whole, it was like 5 episodes. And I at the end I was like, oh, I really know about the Reform, I really know about Martin Luther. And then like the next day I was like, now what years?
I know.
Uh,
I always think I'm never going to forget anything. I'm like, of course I'm going to remember this. And then 2 days later, I'm like, what was that thing? I don't even remember the thing, like,
yeah.
oh God. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's super fascinating. And, there's some really, now that I've had the pleasure of reading all three of your novels, I'm not missing one. Am I? Is there a fourth?
There was a very early one that I wrote, the very first one back in 2004, Away From You,
Oh, I didn't even
which is
realize.
like most, yeah, it's like most first novels, very autobiographical. Although I have to say up front, that one, I think it feels very old-fashioned.
Mm.
Lots has changed. I think in terms of how we approach stories, particularly stories set in uh, other countries, and also the main character inherits like millions of dollars, so I always have to write the caveat of like, no, it may seem autobiographical, but I didn't inherit millions of dollars. um and my father didn't try to kill his mistress, so
Oh
uh,
my gosh.
also an important
Spoiler
fact.
alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert, right? Because people always, they always read your books trying to see where that line is between you and your characters. I know we talked about that in the underneath.
Yeah.
And I think that, in the gloaming, I would say it's pretty hard to find me. Like I have not lived in a small Swiss village. Although that said, my husband is Swiss
Oh,
and
interesting.
he's part Swiss, and his family does have a chalet in a Swiss village that looks very much like the one in the book. And his brother was like really upset with me. He's like, oh, I'll never feel the same about Siggersville again. And I'm like, well,
Is this the same
the
brother-in-law
same
who thinks
brother.
you wanted to kill your husband?
Yeah, the same brother. So I'm like, why do you even read my books?
And like, stop reading my stuff. Like,
I don't think he read The Hair. So, and then, in The Hair, of course, there's actually someone who is shot in a basement.
right.
So I think that,
I mean,
and
things have to stay exciting. So he just has to understand, like,
I mean, my husband is still here. Like he's still alive. There's no bruises on him. So, I
he
think he's
going
still
around looking for every hammer in the house and like hiding it.
right.
Oh my God. So funny. Well, what I was going to say is I think that, in seeing at least the three of your four novels now, it does feel like there's a common theme, not many common themes, but some common themes. And one I think is just your fascination, it seems, with this idea of what is good and what is evil, and is there such a thing as good or evil, and what do you call everything in the in between? And I think all three novels really articulate different versions of that question. Do you know what I mean? Like, is that something that feels like a conscious part of your writing, or does that feel like that's just the way you grapple with life and it sort of comes out in your stories?
No, it's definitely, because I think it's an endlessly unanswerable question. The good people do bad things, and does that mean that bad people can do good things? And like, what is that line between good and bad? And when we demonize people, oh, he's a monster, or
Yeah.
she's wicked, or you're immediately removing them from any sense of humanity, and therefore you lose all curiosity about them. And I think any writer is really fascinated with like the margins of those murky margins. I mean, one of the things that came up with writing The Gloaming, which I thought was interesting, was initially when my agent went out with the book. um, the first couple of publishers said that they found Pilgrim to be too passive.
Oh,
And
that's so interesting. I don't
uh,
find it passive at all.
right, well, no, they found it very passive because she was a wife
Oh,
and she didn't sort of fight back. And they found her passivity. And I remember at the time thinking, so what? We only have to write about like Wonder Woman, like gung ho, oh, aggressive. I'm going to change the world. And it seems so unreal to me because, first of all, there are many women out there who are, I don't want to say leading passive lives, but they're not on the front lines changing anything. They're
nor
just
should everybody have to be, right? Like, I mean, the world would be a disaster if everyone thought that that was their job. Like, sorry,
right. Or that
go
this is
ahead.
somehow, no, but this is somehow like how we now have another version of how women are supposed to be. Oh, you shouldn't just be married. You have to be doing all these other things. You have to have, and I realize, of course, of these women who are in publishing, um, 90% of them are, they're out there, they're publishing, they're going to book fairs, they're making deals, and then they're coming home and they're doing their children. They are doing everything. So for them to be presented by somebody, Pilgrim initially essentially arm candy, they couldn't really feel very comfortable with this character.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of like ambiguity about that too. Well, how do you make a character interesting who is passive? You know, how do you make this passive person become embroiled in something that is a really terrible act? And that her passivity is somehow reconfigured when she erroneously takes responsibility for this action, right? I mean, she's
Yeah.
not responsible, but she becomes less passive as she feels like she becomes responsible for this action. So
Yeah.
again, like, yeah, so there's just I just there's endless stuff to write about in the murk. The murk
Yeah.
the
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely fascinating work. And I think especially how tricky everything is in the world today and American politics and not to say that all of the murk hasn't always been there. It's just that we're all so aware of it because of social media and because of everyone knowing everything all the time and then not knowing what's true and what's not, all the problems that, we're dealing with right now. But it's like, I think, it's interesting to have a story
sorry,
like, oh, it's okay. Is that the dog?
the dogs were like they were starting to play and noisy.
Oh, it's okay.
Sorry.
They can be in the conversation. But it's just interesting to like read stories like yours where there is a lot of grace for all of the stuff in the murk as opposed to the judging. You know what I mean? Like it's like I find myself a little bit paralyzed in this like labeling culture that we seem to be in, where like everything has to have some label of its dysfunction or condition or state of being in some, where I feel sort of trapped, where it's like you can't quite move through life in an instinctive way because you're always at the risk of offending someone who you would never want to offend. And so it's like so interesting to read all three of the novels that I've read of yours where there is so much space for everything to be like not nebulous because everything is very well defined in your stories, but like bigger than their names. I don't know. I don't know how else to put it. Do you have a better way of articulating what I'm trying to say?
No, so what I'm working on with my husband right now is we're working on this small piece about the salt marsh sparrow, which is this little sparrow that lives on the salt marsh, and it's going extinct because of course our marshes are also, essentially going extinct
Oh,
because of sea level rise, but because of, a lot of human impact that we didn't really think about, but the combination. And anyway, long story, in thinking about these marshes and talking with people who do a lot of work, not just on marshes, but culturally with marshes, that how marshes are these really liminal spaces. They're very ambiguous. They're very muddy and murky, and they're uncertain, and you walk across them. And this one gentleman, Anthony Wilson, we were talking, and he's like, people don't want ambiguity, they want certainty. And so places like swamps and wetlands where
mm,
there's a lot of ambiguity, people instinctively react against that, and they want to pave it over, they want to harden it. And I think that as a species we don't like ambiguity, right? We want our lawn, and then we
yeah,
want a tidy border, you know
yeah,
a straight line. We don't want a crooked line. So even the ways that we interact with landscape and shape landscape, it's always to sort of tidy it and do away with ambiguity. And when you look at what's happening with gender, there's a lot of ambiguity, and people are don't know how to deal with that. I mean, even the people who are going through gender exploration struggle with that ambiguity, right? It's
sure.
like a constantly changing thing. And so I honestly think we just want things to be this way. And I don't know how we learn to live with the ambiguity, but I think that's what the space for fiction has to occupy, is it's
Yeah.
showing people that ambiguity is where we normally are. Like certainty is
Certainty is the rarity, not the norm.
certainty
Yeah.
is the rarity. And so when you look at, everything the pilgrim goes through, particularly when she moves to the coast in Tanga, where everything feels ambiguous, the weather, the heat, the kind of like it's so hot there that you feel like you're underwater all the time. And
Mm.
all this black magic just kind of woven into the everyday. I mean, everywhere you go, there's a tree that has all these offerings under it, and everybody believes in spirits. Like, there's no idea that ghosts don't exist, or that there's no question that spirits are completely part of the everyday. So if a cup falls off, the kitchen counter, it's not because you knocked it or the cat knocked it. It's the spirit that did it.
Yeah.
And so entering that place, that kind of more liminal, free form place, was really interesting for me to bring the character
Hmm.
as she kind of unraveled, for sure, but in the process of unraveling, actually comes back to find herself. And then
Well,
it
and
came.
that's what it felt. I mean, it felt also like, I mean, maybe I'm reading into it, but it did feel like there were these breadcrumbs of like, there was a part of her that desired this result and her sort of extraction from her marriage in order to find her whole self. Since she did get married so young, there was sort of she sort of got stunted in a way because it was such she was so young when she got married. And there was just a she reached a point in her life where like she just had to find the rest of herself. And even though there were some really tragic things that happened post divorce and with the accident, there also was a lot of really interesting self discovery that was going on that felt necessary for her to be a whole person.
So one of the criticisms, and again, it's part of the reasons that I stopped really, with the exception of the underneath, setting my novels in quote unquote Africa. I
Mm.
say that very broadly. Was that there was a criticism from another writer, who said that white people always go to Africa to solve their problems.
Oh, interesting.
And I felt that was a very accurate accusation,
Hmm.
and certainly one that I had been very guilty of in my first book, two books away from you, and The Gloaming, in that the sort of idea that we have of Africa as being the opposite, or sort of chaotic, or sort of other, and then if we go into this other place, our own familiar self comes into relief.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I think that was, yeah, I mean, I look back and that there was a very astute accusation, and I know and I admit that that is why I took Pilgrim there, because only when she was thrown into somewhere that was completely opposite, well, everything that was familiar to her, would she be able to see herself in
Mm.
relation against that background.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the white savior thing with her at the end,
Mm.
which again was, I mean, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to apologize
I
for it,
mean, but
because
it's also that's also tricky because I totally hear you of it being like an accurate accusation, but at the same time, where is there space for people to give back and to contribute where there is need without us constantly looking at everybody's color of skin in that situation? Do you know what I mean? Like, is she only allowed to save white people or help white people? You know what I mean? Like, if someone feels called to help and there is a need, are you not allowed to fill that need if you don't sort of fit the right skin tone? You know what I mean? Like, and in background and what is the word that I'm looking for? Culture. Like, how do we figure that out?
I don't know, because I know two of the people I admire most. My friend Father Patton in Tanzania runs the Flying Medical Service. I mean, he's provided medical care to thousands and thousands of impoverished Maasai in the remotest areas of Tanzania since the late 1980s. And he's from Michigan. And then I
Yeah.
have another friend who set up a special burn hospital, for children, to do orthopedic and burn care. And she's been doing that for 20 years. And so, I think that there's, of course, there's a place, for people to dig in and make things better. I think that we have to separate that from the reality of a very paternalistic approach. That certainly was something I experienced as a child. And
Mm,
I think that that's really died out. I mean, I honestly don't go, whenever I go back, I don't see a lot of like do-gooders drifting around trying to, you know, put a
yeah.
band on some kid. I mean, I think people genuinely realize, like Gloria in the book, like, how hard you have to work and how
Yeah.
committed you have to be to actually make something better. It's not just like, oh, let me go and save a bunch of orphans.
Oh,
You,
yeah.
you have to dig in and you
Yeah.
have to be serious about it. So
Well, that actually bringing up Gloria kind of leads me to a craft question. I'm doing the thing I said I would never do, but I'm realizing it's super important, which is to say, if you love this podcast, even if you just like this podcast, like or subscribe to the bookshelf of Jennifer Morrison on whatever platform you're listening on. It helps us to know that you enjoy the show. It helps us to know that we can keep doing this. It helps us to let the world know that we can keep doing this and keep interviewing all these amazing authors and bringing you these great conversations. So please, please, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening. Thank you. I find that you are able to define your characters so quickly. I mean, within a couple sentences, I know exactly what everybody looks like and like what they're wearing and what their essence seems to be. How how do you approach that from a craft perspective? Do you know what I mean? Like that can't just be like an easy thing to be like, oh, you know what? Gloria is going to be so clear in one paragraph. You know what I mean?
I think there's two things. I think the first is that I did this back in the 90s. Oh God, not the 70s.
'70s.
70s, let me say that right now. But back in the 90s, I had this gig in LA working for Zalman King, writing the Red Shoe Diaries, right?
Yeah.
Which this is like erotica pieces, and there was David Duchovny was one of the main actors, and basically you had 27 pages. So you had 27 minutes. But within the first 7 pages, you had to create these characters who were going to hit it off and like jump in the sack in some way. So, and it had to be real. I mean, Zalman, this wasn't just like bump and grind. This was like Zalman was really big on who are these people?
Yeah.
Why are they attracted to each other? And, what is the story? And, then we were like out in Canoga Park and this like warehouse. It was all like flat fluorescent lighting. And, but he really did teach me to think about how do you create two people who are recognizable very quickly and recognizable to each other, because you really only had 3 pages for I want to say the cute meet,
Yeah.
but it worked. Like you had to think, what do they look like? What will they say? How will they say it? What do they wear? Those that had to work. And then the episodes that we did that really worked, that was the key, that you knew who those characters were.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that I think was really helpful was, again, with my first book, Away From You. It got published in the US by St. Martin's Press. And the woman, the publisher who took it on, she had like 4 kids. And I mean, objectively, her life was like insane. And my agent asked her, well, how do you decide what books to,
Yeah.
and she said, my rule of threes. She said, I read the first 3 lines. If I'm hooked after 3 lines, I'll read 3 paragraphs. She said, if I'm hooked after 3 paragraphs, I'll read 3 pages. And then she said, and if I'm that far, I'll read 3 chapters and then I'll buy the book. She said, she was seldom wrong after the first 3 pages. She knew the rest of the book was going to be really good. So I think that she was saying that she could recognize craft and
Hmm.
aptitude, and that you were not going to waste people's time. So I've always kind of approached the beginning of my book like, oh God, I have to get into it.
Got it past the rule of
And,
threes.
and you think, there are these editors, they go piles and
Oh,
piles
I
of
can't imagine. I mean, I just the amount of scripts that I have to read for numerous reasons, and I'm constantly
and the
trying to
same
unbury
thing
myself.
with the script. You want to know very quickly who that person is. You don't want to be finding out who that person is on page 20. You
No.
want to know like the first thing that comes out of their mouth. has to
tells you
sit.
who they are.
Yeah.
And so then, I mean, so okay, let's say you're writing Gloria, like you know, and you get to the point where Gloria is introduced in the story. Do you end up having to sort of like overwrite her description to then pare it back, like almost like turn something bigger into like a poem of who she is, or do you just naturally so have that efficient ability now that it's not really something that has to be worked through?
And I think it's more like a sort of kernel of, this sounds manipulative, but it's like, what role is this person going to play? If they're not the main character, what is their purpose? And
Mm,
so that kind of kernel, what lesson are they going to teach your main character? So,
mm,
you sort of build it build it out from them. And certainly with Gloria, I wanted somebody who was the opposite of Pilgrim, who had a hard scrabble life, who was very clear about what she wanted to do, who had fought really hard for everything, and who had through sheer grit made a place for herself in this strange world. And so I think that was, that's also the start of it. And then you pile on the characteristics. What do they look like? What do
yeah.
they speak like? Really, where are they from? And how do they dress? How do they live? That kind of comes out of it's. I guess it's like working backward. You don't create the character, you create the reason for that character. And again, that's, I think, secondary characters. Your first characters are much more organic.
Right.
Like Pilgrim really came to me very strongly as this vulnerable person trying to find her way in the world, um, and even struggle to a certain extent. Um, I felt him very strongly as a character. And then I have to talk about Dorothea.
Oh, Dorothea, my gosh.
So she was based on a real person.
Oh, wow.
So at the just before we moved to the States, I had been living in this remote part of Tanzania, Lake Natron, and I know people who've listened to you before know that. And I had sort of started being kind of like a local medic because there was no hospital, there was no nothing like for miles and miles and miles. So if people couldn't walk, they couldn't get medical care. So it was like you get better or you die. And across the lake, it was about a 10-mile walk, was this little village called Ingarasero, which is just sort of like, blink and you're through it. And when we first got there was this completely useless doctor who he just couldn't do anything. He was drunk all the time. And then he was replaced by this extraordinary person, Dorothea, who became the Dorothea character, and she was like that. She came out of like the little hut that was the dispensary, and she had this extraordinary wig on, this amazing like bright purple pantsuit, and this scarf, and these big earrings. I was like, what? I mean, this is in the middle of nowhere in Tanzania, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Doctor." Blah. And she was an incredibly passionate doctor,
Hmm.
very committed to what she did. And the story is like the story is almost true. I went one day and she was so upset because her assistant, one of her nurse assistants, had been pregnant and had started bleeding out, and she'd run around town trying to find someone with a car, and they finally find someone with a car, but the drive to the nearest hospital up the escarpment, the Rift Valley escarpment,
Oh,
was going to be 4 hours, and they didn't know if they had enough gas. And she said, well, we have to try, we
oh
have to try.
God.
They get in the car and they drive up the escarpment. Of course, they get halfway up the escarpment
And there's no gas.
and there's no gas. They're on a gas. There's the woman in the back of the car. She's bleeding out. She has the baby. The baby dies.
Oh,
They finally get a passing lift. They get to Ngarasero. The mother's life was saved, but I think that the reality of that. as obviously we grapple with what's happening with women's reproductive rights in this country,
Yeah.
we think about reproductive health in these remote areas and the experience for really most women in the world,
Mm.
you know, this is extremely dangerous business, having a baby and getting pregnant and having a baby. And that profoundly affected me, and the way everybody sort of had to deal with it like it was a normal thing. And then for Dorothea, the Dorothea character, to feel so helpless when she was so committed to being a doctor was very profound. And the bit about her sons being taken by her by the
Oh,
that was true. He did take them, and she couldn't get them back, because in Tanzania, the woman is not, and it may have changed, but at that time, is not recognized as having rights if the father is of a different nationality, and the father was.
wow.
So she had no rights. In the end, she did get her children back. So,
Oh, thank God.
as far as
I
I know, she's still out there saving lives in her crazy pantsuits.
her
And
purple pantsuit.
yeah,
Wow. I mean, that's the stuff that is just so hard to wrap my brain around, in terms of like those children came out of her body. Like, how do you not have the right to be their parent when that's the case? Like, it's just so wild to me. And I mean, even in traveling, as an American, it's like I a big part of why I wanted to add my husband's last name to mine legally was just because I didn't want to be questioned as to whether my child or future children were mine. It's just so crazy to think that like, oh my God, my kid would have a different last name than me, and then I'd have to prove that they were my kid just to be able to travel with them if he didn't happen to be traveling with us. It's like things like that where it's like, oh man, there's still some residue, like lots of residue from kind of the old way of thinking with all this stuff.
well, I think in terms of this idea that your children, you know, can't belong to you if the father has a different nationality. I mean, it just goes back to the idea that hey, you're kind of like a half person anyway. I mean,
Right.
children or don't produce children, like, you're just sort of like some vessel that does this thing, but it doesn't give you any right to say, I don't want to get pregnant. I mean, again, in Tanzania, if you want to have your tubes tied because you don't want any more children, you have to have your husband's permission. Like,
Oh,
forget an abortion, forget that. Like, you want to say, I don't want to have any more kids for whatever reason, your husband has to give his permission because it's his body. So, again, there's like these filaments that you see
yeah.
even when I was a child. My father was British. My mother was British, but it was my father's Britishness, because I was born in Kenya. It was my father's Britishness that allowed me to be a Brit, not my mother's.
Huh.
It was my father's. It came down through the patriarchy.
That is so crazy.
It's
It's
changed now, but that's how it was back in the day. Like, it mattered. So I think it's hard for, I mean, again, I'm 60, so a lot has changed, but I think as we kind of find ourselves in this place now, it's really hard for young people to understand this stuff is not that far away. It's
no.
not that far away. I mean, and it's still out there, just of course.
Yeah. And it's also even in the progress that's been made, the residue of how it has been and was is still affecting everyone in a way that they may not realize. Yeah,
Well,
it's
when the people who hold the powers of have the powers of lever in their 70s and 80s, like, this is how they were brought up.
yeah.
So um anyway, yeah. So
I know. I know. Okay, so a couple other themes that I noticed. One in this book that I don't think I felt as much in other books was just this idea of like what it meant for an older man to be with a younger woman. There seemed to be several kind of intentional pairings in that way in this novel. Was that something you were intentionally exploring here?
Um, I think that in terms of struggle and Pilgrim, I think again, I think it was that ambiguity that you have Strebel, who sees himself as a very righteous person, um, who is always trying to do the right thing and the best thing, but is obviously going through a crisis of his own, a
Yeah.
midlife crisis, and you know, embarks on this relationship, which is by all means a really bad idea. I mean, ethically and morally and emotionally.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I think people fall into trouble like sheep into, sheep dip. Like we can't always do the right thing. And sometimes doing the wrong thing does lead us to revelation.
Mm.
Um, so um and I think that certainly for Pilgrim at that point, I think just being with someone who was good um was
Mm.
was helpful to her because he is a good man. He is a really good person. He's not a great husband,
Sure.
but he is a good human being. Um, and I think she needed that comfort. I mean, her husband was a jackass. And again, like, here's this guy who's heroic. I mean, he's a human rights lawyer who, defends the most abused and meekest, poorest people in the world, but was actually really kind of really deceitful and dishonest to this young woman who was his wife. Um, so yeah, I think there's obviously a power dynamic there in both those situations that both these older men she was with had a power over her. But clearly Strebel didn't try to deceive her.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
and I think, was genuinely had deep feelings for her, or at least for what she represented to him.
Yeah. And then in terms of the accident, was that something that you kind of knew was going to be the centerpiece of the sort of trauma on the other side of her marriage? Or did that kind of present itself as you were writing? Do you remember if that was an early piece that you were aiming for or kind of revealed itself?
Well, I mean, there was the idea of the accident. And then I think at some point in my history, I had read a very powerful New Yorker short story about a woman who I don't she was in a car accident holding holding her baby in the back seat, as one did in those days. I mean,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
back seat, you didn't need a seat belt, you know. And she was in some accident. There was a car crash, and of course, the baby was
Oh,
out of her arms and killed. And she went through all sorts of trauma. And then I think that, hello, sorry, some random person.
oh, I
Uh,
can't hear it. Is someone calling you?
yeah, there's somebody downstairs. I've got no idea who would be showing up in my house in the middle of the day.
Do you need to go check? You want to pause?
Yeah, just pause a
Yeah, yeah,
sec.
yeah, absolutely.
Hold on.
Everything
It's never,
okay?
never a home. So it's my neighbor Bob who he bought me some more garlic.
Oh,
But then the dog got out and the dog wouldn't come back in. So Bob lurches after the dog, falls, dislocates his finger. I'm not
oh,
kidding. It was like at this L angle. And he's like, oh my God, my finger. I'm like, well, just push it back into place. And he's like, do you think I should? I'm like, yes. he does. He pushes it back into place. He's like, oh, it's fine now. It's like, all he did was just go into the door. Like, what? So,
do you need to go help Bob? I
so
mean,
sorry.
do you need
It's
to
not like
go?
it's just not like the UPS guy saying, can you find for this package? It's this whole calamity of the dislocated finger and the dog escaping.
I don't mean to laugh at someone's pain. I hope he's okay though, right? Like it's
He's
okay.
fine. I'm like, do you need
Sure.
to sit down? He's like, no, I'm good now. My finger's good.
Oh, it's too crazy.
I got my garlic. And I don't
Thank
even,
God you have your garlic.
I have, yeah, a pound of garlic, 2 pounds of garlic. So we're all
Wow.
good.
Oh my God, I don't even know what we were talking about. We
I
were
have no idea. I have no
it's
idea.
fine. It wasn't important. One of the other things that I found just so delightfully eerie. I mean, it's like I find myself thinking about it a lot is the coffee in the sink when
Oh,
the
yeah.
dad had been sort of like watching her and intentionally letting her know that she was watched before he made any move of trying to hurt her. And I just thought, man, it's such a simple little thing, but it would I think that would make me crazy. I think I would completely fall apart if that happened to me. Where did the idea for that come? And then how did you build that out?
Well, so I think that there's sort of two things, and well, the first is like there's a famous Tom Hanks saying about the most frightening moment in any horror movies when you know you there's like the close on of the knife block, one of the knives is missing. Like
Right.
no, so it's not the horror, it's the anticipation, and then I just find like household implements can be turned into these very creepy, very creepy things. That was I can't remember like why I chose. There's some other reason, but it's lost to me now. But I thought I wanted it to be subtle, so that how do you build that so that oh I know what it is now. Oh yeah, that's right. So I had this friend who lived in LA, and he had this girlfriend, and it took him a while to realize she was completely not very mentally well.
Stable. Yeah.
And he finally asked her to move out. And months go by, weird things are happening, but he's not really like clocking it because he was a doctor who was really busy. And then he got a new girlfriend, and she moved in with him. And she came home one day, and all the furniture in his house had been turned upside down. And her suitcases, 2 suitcases with all of her stuff, were just put in the front hall. And it was, I remember hearing that story and just thinking, that is so scary. Like,
Also is so much work to turn all the
so much
furniture
work,
upside down.
so much work. But the idea that somebody had been in there so purposefully all day, they hadn't smashed stuff up. There wasn't anger, like it would be almost better if you came in and like somebody had just like smashed things up or cut stuff up.
Oh,
But like the process and the thought of turning everything over, this sort of sinisterness of that. And I so I kind of transposed it, but I wanted it to be less, I don't know, just simpler. Like,
a little less dramatic.
yeah, what are the things that would freak you out? Like a plastic bag and a roll of duct tape.
Oh, the duct tape. When
Really
duct tape starts
scary.
showing up, you're like, wait, hang on. Like, was he
There's
gonna
duct
duct tape
tape.
her to the bed? Like,
There's duct tape in this scene that I'm writing in my new book now. One of the characters in the car, she sees a roll of duct tape on the floor, and it does. It goes south for her from then. So yeah, and partly is I can never find duct tape in my own house, so it's useful for me to put it in stories. Because
it's a way of finding it when you need it.
nobody, yeah, nobody's
But
taken
why I
it.
always say you can't make a movie without duct tape. I mean, the most important element on a film set is duct tape. It's unbelievable. So like duct tape is either saving the day or ending your life. I mean, it's one or the
And
other.
there again, there's the ambiguity. There's the black and white. Which is it going to be? Is it going to be the good thing or the bad thing? So
Oh my God. Wow. Well, I'm thinking it would be really nice next season if you're into it, if we could do like a full craft episode where we look at your first novel as like a study of like how you feel like you've evolved from away from her. Is that what you said it was called?
away from you.
Away from you. I feel like that could be a really lovely next interview if that's something you don't have to say yes, no. You can think about
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I hope I have evolved. Certainly at the minute, I feel like I haven't evolved. I'm like, this is just as hard as it.
Well, that's because you're in the process of writing, and that's it's painful, and
And I
everybody
remember,
doubts themselves.
I remember I'd like hooked everything on this book away from you, and I printed the first version out. And I remember exactly where I was sitting when I read it, and I was like, this is so bad. This is so, so, so bad. And so now I know that when the first time you print something out, you're going to go, oh my God, this is awful. Like this is just terrible. So there is that.
Yeah.
There is that. I mean, maybe it's like being married, like for the sixth time. You're like, well, I know to expect this now.
Right.
Sixth marriage. I'm not going to put the towel up off the floor. I know that now.
Don't even hope for it, right? I'm very lucky. My husband is very tidy. I don't have any towels on the floor in my house,
No.
um but yeah, I think that would be really fun. It would be interesting to kind of
Fun.
look back at it in that way. And also I think it'd be really nice for our listeners to kind of hear, like hear what your process is with craft in terms of, hating that first draft and feeling like it's terrible. And then what do you do once you feel like it's terrible? How do you get through that feeling? How do you, so I think that would be a really lovely thing for our listeners. So many of them are aspiring writers, and anything that you're willing to offer that way, I think would be great.
Yeah, my advice immediately is like stop doing it. Just give up. Or while you still have your sanity. But I know it's not possible. People are compelled. And
No, I
that
think it's so funny because how, I mean, I don't ask you this question because I've already asked you this question, but my last question is, what advice has someone given you that you would want to give to our audience? And the last person I interviewed said, just keep going. And you're like, just stop.
just stop. Just give up right now. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that you have to give up the idea that your book is going to be a major bestseller. I think that that fantasy can be very problematic because it is so difficult. It's so difficult to find an agent. It's so difficult to find a publisher that you just have to write the book because you want to write it. And I think people start out thinking, you can't help it. I mean, I remember when I first moved to LA, oh my God, I'm gonna do this or that. And, like most of the time it doesn't happen. And so why are you writing? What is it? What is the purpose? What if it never gets published? What if nobody reads it? What if you never get an agent? Are you prepared for that? Because it is really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
You know, does just the difficulty of it prepare you for all the other hard things in life? Which I think is, I mean, you reach late middle age, still hanging on to that middle age part, even as I sign up for AARP. Um, you know, life is incredibly difficult. And I look back and I'm like, there's a novel that never got published. There's scripts that never got made. There's unbelievable amounts of time that I've sat at my desk creating brilliant characters who said amazing things, and they will never see the light of day. And so being prepared for wasting your time,
Wow.
and how do you feel that it wasn't wasted, or how are you going to feel about that? Like, I
How
guess
has it contributed to your experience? Because it's your journey that it's contributing to, not necessarily something that is going to go into the world in another way.
and I'll just end on this as I'm gonna have to stop talking at some point.
Yeah, no, yeah, we'll end.
I was out walking the land the other day, and it's winter or fall, late fall now, so all the leaves are gone, and you can see the whole landscape. Everything is very bared and exposed. And sometimes I find these old cellar holes from old houses that were built on our land, and you come across this cellar hole, which is these huge stones and dug out, and the land would have all been cleared then. It would have all been sheep farms. There would have been no trees. So, I find these cellar holes and I think of that farmer and his family who worked so hard to build that
Mm,
house. And every winter, like life was so physically difficult, let alone, childbirth and people dying from childbirth and getting infections and trees falling on husbands and leaving, you know, the idea of being a farmer is so precarious. You put all your effort into this, and maybe there's a blight, or maybe there's a drought, or maybe
mm,
there's rains that wash everything away. And at the end of the season, you're left with nothing.
mm.
And I think being a writer is somewhat like that. It's always going to be a chance. And seeing that maybe as more broadly as how life is, it's not an accumulation of success. It's not a trajectory up. It's a lot about wasting time and loss and not necessarily maybe having to do away with ideas of what success looks like. Um, yeah. So those cellar holes are
It's
useful for
your,
me. But
Melanie, you never fail to bring our conversations to the next level. I'm so grateful that you're always willing to sit down and give us so much time. And yeah, I love all of your novels. I can't tell people enough. I do think they should start with The Gloaming though. I think they should go forwards instead of backwards. I know I did it backwards, but I would suggest to people to go forwards. But yeah, I'm not only grateful for you doing this, I'm just grateful to know you and have you in my life. So thank you.
thank you, Jen, and thanks for bearing with Bob and the garlic and the
I'm
dyslexic.
just glad that Bob is okay and that
Bob
you
is
have your garlic.
okay. And the garlic, his great garlic. It's like the most amazing stuff. So I know your Italian husband would appreciate the garlic.
Yes, yes, absolutely. All right. Well, until next time.
Jen, thanks so much for having me. Thanks you. You always ask such great questions. It's really easy to have these conversations with
Well, thank you.
you.